Why is it that one worker, when making the whole product, takes so much longer than 10 workers who all each just do one tiny task in the making of the product? This is explained through the division of labor and specialization. In this video, we will be looking at how firms can produce products effectively and efficiently. Hi friends, welcome to Econverse. I'm Abrar and I'm a fellow student who topped in my GCSE Economics last year in Oman. On this channel, we make learning economics simpler, clearer, and hopefully a lot more fun. In this video, let's look at how firms produce products. Let's get started. Looking at firms and how they produce products. So when we look at how they produce products, I think it's essential that we go back to the basics and we remember the factors of production. So the four factors of production are land, labor, capital, and enterprise. I hope we all know that by now. So I think there is a few key things that we need to understand before we head into this. So firstly, let's begin with the differences between short run and long run. So when we look at short run, essentially when you have these key terms in economics, so short run and long run mean two different things. So when you have short run, what it essentially means is that the four factors of production are constant, which means the four factors of production cannot be increasing in the short run, whereas in the long run, four factors of production are variable, which means they can increase or decrease in the long run. Now, another key point that we need to understand is the differences between production and productivity. So this is something key that we need to understand. So production basically means the total output of goods in an economy. So the total output, whereas productivity refers to the average output. So one thing that we need to understand is, now let's just take a look at some diagrams to understand the differences between them. So firstly, let's take a look at a total product diagram and an average output diagram. Total output and average output. So when you look at the total product as a whole, this is somewhat what the diagram represents. It's called a total product. And then when you look at average output, essentially it's somewhat like that, and this is called average product. So what this illustrates is essentially the difference between production and productivity. So the key differences are that production may fall with unemployment. However, it may rise even with a fall in the technology. On the other hand, productivity may rise if skill is retained, and the number of hours may remain the same even if the average product increases. So basically the difference between production and productivity is production is the total output and the productivity is the output per person. So that is essentially the key difference in between production and productivity. Now let's try and understand what are the different approaches that firms take to producing products. Whenever you look at the production, you have capital intensive and you have labor intensive. So before we move on to labor, let's look at capital intensive. Essentially what it means is when you look at capital intensive, what it means is that there's high technology that's being used, very advanced technology, and skill-based areas function. So skill-based areas function better with it, and there is generally a higher productivity with capital intensive systems. There is lower average costs, AC. The product quality is quite high, and is by high what I mean is it is quite uniform, and there is low, or you can even say no. You see that rhymes? Okay, that was bad. Low or no chance for human error. And there's no trade union based issues, because whenever you have trade unions, I want you to think about it as a firm. Probably when you have trade unions, the issue is that they tend to argue for higher wages. There's a lot of conflict between firms and trade unions. So when there's no trade unions, that is amazing as a firm's point of view. And then there could be no holidays. So when your employees don't take any holidays, generally production and productivity both tend to improve. And then we look at the next approach, which is the labor intensive approach. So when you look at the labor intensive approach, there are some key features to it. I mean, everyone would expect this. There is large supply of labor, and then there is low cost of production, because labor is actually cheaper than the capital, at least in the short run. And then you have advantages for small firms with less capital. So this is more suitable for smaller firms because they don't have that much capital available to invest. More suitable for small firms. And then another important idea is that it is quite important that workers are mobile. So when you have a labor intensive production method, workers must be mobile. Mobile basically means they could be geographically mobile or occupationally mobile. What it means is geographically they should be willing to be able to move from one place to another. They should be flexible. And when you look at occupationally, they should have the ability to do different kinds of jobs. And then labor feedback improves the quality. So they call it Kaizen. So Kaizen basically means continuous improvement, and when you have labor feedback, it generally tends to have Kaizen because, as Stephen Bartlett says, failure leads to failure leads to feedback, feedback leads to knowledge, and knowledge leads to power. Then we look at labor substituting capital with equal efficiency. There is to some extent equal efficiency. So when you have labor intensive systems, they could be as efficient as labor. Then capital tends to depreciate, so capital loses value. This is a key argument that you need to remember. Whenever you have something that is non-human like capital, it can lose value over time. So that is it pretty much for firms and production. If you think this video helped you understand economics better, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join the Econverse. I'll see you again in the next video where we look at how even when producing so many products, some firms might actually be suffering.